So, if you visited Rome in the 1650s and 1660s, you would hire a tour guide to show you around because the internet hadn't been invented yet. One topic your tour guide would tell you about was all the famous people who paid for all those buildings they were showing you and some good quality gossip about them. It was like lifestyles of the rich and famous mixed with TMZ. And one topic they loved was the rivalry between the two best architects of the time, Gian Lorenzo Bernini, who is on this side, which I think is your left, and Francesco Borromini on the other side. Their rivalry was unmatched as they battled it out for position of top dog. There's not enough time to tell you everything I know about them. You have got to look them up. Trust me, there's so much happening. Not just the art and the architecture and the sculpture, but a number of juicy scandals, all of which we are cutting for time. So, an example of this sort of gossip would be when Borromini was awarded the renovation of the Propaganda Fide Palace. Bernini's house supposedly was directly across the street from the construction, and this was particularly insulting to Bernini as he had the original commission for the palace. But when Pope Urban VIII died, the new Pope, Innocent X, hired Borromini to replace the really large side facade with something that Bernini didn't do. So gossip said that Borromini added donkey's ears, as illustrated here, to the facade, pointing directly at Bernini's house. And in response, Bernini added giant dicks to the front facade of his house so they would point at the palace. So imagine if that building on 9th Street here in SF, instead of being covered in pianos, was covered in tasteful giant phalluses. Dicks. Art. Gossip also said that the authorities promptly had both the ears and the dicks removed, so your tour guide can't show them to you, but it is totally a true story. It's not a true story. Well, the dicks could have been real, but the story is fake. So there's another story that they used to tell that is still making the rounds today. It's about this fountain by Bernini and this church, which Borromini worked on for a couple of years, wasn't even the main architect, and he even worked on it after the fountain was finished, but never let that get in the way of a good story. So they are so close together that you can't even get a photo of the church without the fountain in the foreground. So as you can see, the fountain and the church are facing each other pretty closely on the Piazza Navona. So gossip said that when Bernini was designing this fountain, he added in cheeky insults to Borromini's church, carving this figure of the Rio della Plata as if worried that the nearby church was going to fall on it because the architect was so bad. And the Nile, his eyes are covered by the blindfold as he couldn't bear to look at the church. And then at the church, this actually rather demure statue of St. Agnes has a hand on her chest and is turning away from the fountain as if to say, ew, I can't even bear to look at it. Of course, as mentioned, they were totally unrelated in time to each other. And none of these statues had any of those meanings behind them. The poses all have different rationales, but gossip's gotta gossip. If you're gonna pay your tour guide, you want some good shit. So, at this time period under discussion, powerful families, individuals, and various arms of the Catholic Church are the only ones who have enough money and power to have large building projects. In particular, the popes effectively controlled all urban planning in Rome, and from the 1640s to the 1670s, all these various popes, they completely remade the city entirely. So having the support and patronage of the Pope would make an architect's career or ruin it. The two popes we care about that we see on screen are Urban VIII Barberini, who ruled for 20 years. He loved everything Bernini did, paid for him to do all his work, loved this guy. There's a quote which I didn't put in because I didn't have the time, but it's too good to pass up, where the Pope says, it's wonderful that I am the Pope, but I am honored to be on this earth at the same time as Bernini. Like, loved him. However, you remember Urban VIII much more because this is the guy who prosecuted Galileo. Science. Hey, mamma mia, let me go. So, the next pope after he died was Innocent X Pamphili, and he reigned for 11 years, and he hated everything his predecessor did. He repudiated all of it, including his architect, so he hired his rival, Francesco Borromini. Innocent X is not known for prosecuting Galileo. He is remembered for having a very close relationship with his late brother's wife. Enough there. So, We're going to look at one masterpiece each by these two architects. So one of the effects of these two architects falling in and out of favor with the Pope is that when they were out of favor, they were available to others in Rome with the money to pay them, which is how we get things like this side chapel by Bernini. This is like being able to hire Frank Lloyd Wright to design your garden shed because he suddenly doesn't have any work. Like, this is a side chapel of a main chapel in the back of a church somewhere. In this case, what resulted was one of the most astounding sculptural masterpieces ever created. For this piece, Bernini created a space that reads like a trip to the theater. There's viewing boxes on either side. The front wall is arranged like a stage. But the placement of these columns and the arrangement, the way that they're opening up, is as if the curtains of the proscenium are being pulled back and you can see a private moment happening. You're being invited in, you're being drawn in, your curiosity is piqued. So this entire installation piece is created to inspire faith in the miraculous. This is Saint Teresa in the moment of having a vision of an angel. There's a sculpture, there's gilding, there's lighting, there's fresco, there's colored marble, there's stained glass, there's like just everything you can throw at this. It is so Baroque. But note how this statue is supported from behind and underneath. It appears to be floating because of the shadows that are cast, but it's a giant piece of marble. And then there's all these brightly colored materials but they create contrast with these three plain white elements, the spectator boxes and the figure itself. This contrast means that all of these rich materials and ornamentation, they just become a visual backdrop for this moment. They fade away from our visual interest. The last thing to note is something that you as a modern viewer didn't even think about, which is the lighting. These gilded rays behind St. Teresa. They're always lit from above. That light source, which we can see in this photo, you can only see it in this photo because the photographer is lying on the floor directly in front of it. This window is hidden, and it's always lighter outside than inside before the invention of electric light, which means there's God's heavenly rays shining down, and you don't know why. So Bernini's done one other thing to really pull in the viewer, but it created, say, a bit of a scandal at the time. St. Teresa was in her mid to late 50s when she had this vision of the angel that pierced her body with this burning spear. But she didn't describe the relationship of the bodies to each other, etc. Bernini has sculpted Teresa as if she is much younger. He has placed the forms as you see them. Her heavy robes are starting to fall off. Her wimple is starting to fall off. You can almost see her hair. And most shocking of all, you can see her feet, which were very private at the time and highly sexual. This is basically the equivalent of if you took your Playboy centerfold and wrote St. Teresa on the top and nailed it to a church and said, "Behold my work of art." People were scandalized. But the important thing is you can't see this without feeling some sort of emotion. Surprise or awe or joy or faith or anger or prurient interest. It's almost impossible to have a neutral response to this. And that's because Baroque architects were trying to do something that is not apparent to our modern eye. They wanted to bring people back to the Catholic Church from the recent Protestant Reformation. The purpose of Baroque expression of architecture and sculpture is to create feelings, this overwhelming pull of emotion. In the case of church architecture, that emotion is supposed to be an awareness of the glory and greatness of God. By experiencing these spaces, a person would feel like they're exposed to the Holy Father. They would be renewed in their Catholic beliefs. For Borromini, he expressed this through God the geometer, whose presence could be experienced through a masterful control of geometry that couldn't be separated from the whole. This is a section drawing of this church. It's like you took one of those expensive round 9-inch birthday cakes and cut it in half. And then you can see the two halves. So you can see a layer of cake and a layer of frosting and a layer of cake, etc. This church was not a great commission. It was small. The client had a limited budget. It's a tight site. It's got a weird shape. But out of this, Borromini creates one of the most beautiful churches of all time. This is a view from the doorway. San Carlino's full of curvilinear motion. He uses light and shadows to create feeling. All the elements are curvilinear, even things that appear to be flat and straight. It alternates between convex and concave. It's very smooth in these transitions. It's an extraordinarily complicated geometry, which you can see in the entablature, which is that line you see that's being held up by the columns. And then above the entablature, there's these elongated shapes that support the dome full of geometry, all of which supports a blank white slate for the dove in the triangle illuminated by this diffuse light. This space exists to show you how God has created such a complicated geometry on the earthly level, rising up through a more tightly controlled composition until finally at the top, there's light, the holy dove, and the triangle. This is God as the divine geometer. The oval dome was very unusual at the time, and Borromini had to figure out how to transition from this complicated first floor to that dome. He did it through that intermediate level of half domes, but then he makes it seem as if the purpose is about the distribution of light. This is not him trying to figure out the technical details. No, he's done it so that you can experience God. There's no windows at all on the ground floor. There's one at each of those half domes, and then above, the dome and the lantern are ringed all around with windows for the brightest light. The genius of this design lies in how many disparate, overlapping geometric forms are combined in one space to form a cohesive experience. People have returned to this endlessly over the past 350 years because of how delightfully complex yet controlled it is. People cannot stop drawing diagrams of this over and over and over again. I actually lied. We're going to do one more very quickly. Also by Borromini, Sant'Ivo alla Sapienza, the church at the end of the courtyard of the university called La Sapienza, which is the University of the Holy Wisdom. It's the University of Rome. When this church opened, people lost their minds because of how incredible it is, but it's also given rise to those urban legends. So, we are very lucky that two of the very few remaining drawings that Borromini did himself are of this church. We can see that the entirety of the church is just the space under the dome. It's even smaller than San Carlo. Also note the beautiful corkscrew lantern, which was unique for the time and afterwards highly imitated. He's disguised the small size by having the facade at the ground and second floors match the building that already existed. The differentiation happens above. You can see the white curvilinear walls in the lantern. This is the best view you can get from the outside. This is it. This is the best view of it. Again, the birthday cake, if you took a fresh one, you cut a slice out of it. That's what you're seeing. This is the axonometric view. Unlike at San Carlino, at Sant'Ivo, all the geometric shapes are distinct. It is, again, incredibly geometrically complicated. What does it look like when you're in there? It's so small that the only view you have is up. These shapes carry up through the dome in a way that's not discernible from the outside. You have no idea that this is in here at all. Look at how distinct these concave and convex curves are. You have to look up. Again, all of these shapes draw you up to heaven and God, the Holy Spirit, right there at the very top. Now, urban legend. I promise you an urban legend. Here you go. This is how you would draw this plan with a straight edge and a compass, as Borromini did. You start with a circle. You draw 3 intersecting, equally spaced lines to create the 6 lobes of the 6-sided plan. You add your convex and your concave arches. The convex ones are in blue. To check the symmetry of the convex arches, you draw a line between them. That's how you get this red triangle. And then people took this drawing, which was published after Borromini's death, and decided there has to be a second triangle there. It's not visible. I can't see it in the drawing, but it must be there because this guy loves geometry so goddamn much. It's not true. It's not there. There are treatises written about the 6-pointed Star of David or Solomon that's associated with wisdom and how appropriate it is to be at the University of La Sapienza of the Holy Wisdom. It's not there. It's never drawn. It never existed. This urban legend is so insidious, it's even in the Wikipedia entry for this church. No, I did not add it just so I could complain about it. Joseph Connors wrote an entire monograph denouncing this in 1999. There are scholarly articles in the Journal of Applied Mathematics explaining why it's not there. It just won't die. If you go to Rome right now and get a tour guide, they will tell you about this. It's not true. Okay, so what happened to our 2 master architects? What's the end of their stories? After Innocent X died, the next pope after him reinstated Bernini to his professional standing. He remained in favor for the rest of his life. Bernini lived to the ripe old age of 81 and died at home of a stroke. He was faithful to his wife of 40 years, and they had 11 children. Borromini did not have the same happy ending. He was described by a friend as a, quote, difficult, unhappy, and eccentric man. He began to develop paranoid delusions about how Bernini was stealing his opportunities away from him when he was in his 30s, and they worsened over time. He did not receive the same expensive commissions or patronage as Bernini, and which he felt was his due. Finally, he killed himself in early August 1667 at the age of 67. At the time of their deaths, Bernini had a stronger, more comprehensive reputation. He was an incredible Renaissance man. He'd single-handedly shaped sculpture into a dynamic and fluid art form while maintaining additional careers as an architect and a painter. Remember, this is this guy's side gig. He had influential, moneyed, and powerful patrons. Borromini, on the other hand, was practically impossible to work with. He had small commissions from less well-off church groups. He did nothing to advertise his work or career. And then over time, their reputations have changed, mostly based on what society values in the story of the life of an artist. The story of a fellow who was promoted early as a child genius, was mostly in favor with the existing power structure, genuinely well-liked, made beautiful work, and a profit, is not the drama we want in the life of an artist. A singular, isolated, independent genius, only recognized for his true worth by a few, struggling in vain against a power structure, working to keep him down, and who ultimately came to a sad end. This is a story that we as a society revisit again and again. Even today, we don't extend the same appreciation to an artist who doesn't suffer rejection from mainstream society. So let's raise a toast to everyone who creates masterpieces, whoever they are. Because as Baroque architecture teaches us, it takes something special to create human emotion out of nothing, and that deserves to be celebrated.